Now that we have an understanding of our hyperbola, let's turn to examples of the types of questions you will be asked about hyperbolas. So, our first example, we are given this hyperbola where we have 2 over x plus 1 is equal to 3. And our first question is sketch the graph of G. So, let's look at sketching our graphs. So, A1, remember to always label your questions properly so you know which question you are working with. So, to sketch any graph, first of all, let's look at what properties you need to have. So, number 1, you need to have the asymptotes. Number 2, you need to have the x and y intercepts, if there are any. Remember, if an asymptote lands up on an x or y axis, then you're not going to have intercepts there because the graph cannot go through that point. And lastly, you need the shape. So, what I would do is I would start off my asymptotes and do a brief sketch of that to see if I have any x and y intercepts that I need to calculate. Also, what you need to make sure is that for the shape, you're going to have a piece over there and a piece over there. Now, sometimes your x and y intercepts, one will land up in this piece and another one will land up in that piece, which means you've got a point to help you get the shape for each of those arms. But sometimes you don't have a point in those arms from your x and y intercepts, or maybe they both land up in this arm, so you've got points to help you draw that shape, which means you need to find a other point to draw in this arm to help you get your shape. So let's start off looking at this first graph. So firstly, I'm going to decide what my asymptotes are. Now you don't have to write this down, but it helps me to keep track of what I have figured out. So let's start with our y asymptote. And so for our y asymptote, we look at our q value, which is positive 3. So y is equal to 3. Our x asymptote, so our vertical asymptote, is using the p value down here. But don't forget, we need to change the sign, multiply it by a negative. So positive 1 is going to give me negative 1. And I'm going to write that in red just to remind us that we've changed the sign. So here, you don't have to be very precise in this sketch. This is just to help you figure out where you are. So 3 on my y-axis will be over here somewhere. So this asymptote will be over there. And x negative 1 will be on this side of my y-axis. And so this asymptote will be over there. I look at my a value to see which quadrant I'm in. It's a positive 2. And so we know we're in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. And so we can see we've got a y-intercept over here. And we've got an x-intercept over here. So we need to calculate both of those. And because we've got a point in each piece, we don't need to work out another point. So let's go to our intercepts. And let's keep the equation here with us for so long. So my y-intercept, remember when you're on the y-axis, your x value is 0. So we're going to substitute in 0 for x. So y is equal to 2 over, instead of x I put 0 plus 1 plus 3. And this you can just plug into your calculator, or you can do it into your head. 2 divided by 1 is 2. 2 plus 3 is 5. And if you need to, write down the coordinates. So that's the coordinate 0, 5. Only do this if it helps you. Remember, we're only marking what you've got on the graph, not your working out. X-intercept is next. And my x-intercept is on my x-axis. So when I'm on my x-axis, my y value is 0. So we've got 0 is equal to 2 over x plus 1 plus 3. And this takes a little more work. We've got an LCD of x plus 1. So I'm going to multiply each term by x plus 1. And I'm writing this down so that you can see what we did, but you don't have to show it. Once again, if you can do it in your head, you don't need to show it. So anything times 0 stays 0. And we don't need our LCD here anymore, so that's going to be 2 plus 3 being multiplied with this binomial. So 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times 1 is positive 3. So don't forget to distribute your 3. And so we need to solve for x now. So I'm going to bring x over to this side, which gives me negative 3x. 2 plus 3 is 5. And then I need to divide both sides by negative 3. So that's going to be negative 5 over 3. And so this point will be negative 3 goes into 5 once, remainder 2 2/3. And my y value was 0. Now don't be scared of the fractions. Remember, we're not drawing accurate graphs. We're just doing sketches. Now I would be careful of squishing my graph. So make it big so that you've got space rather than squishing it. So I'm going to draw some nice big axes over here. And here is my x-axis. Here's my y-axis so that people know what I'm looking at. And I would start once again by drawing in my asymptotes. So my y-asymptote is here at 3. So 1, 2, 3. I'm using my lines, but I don't have to be very accurate. And there's my vertical asymptote. And so don't forget to label it with the equation y is equal to 3. Now I need my x-asymptote that is at negative 1. So it's about there is 1. Notice I haven't used my ruler to measure out. If you feel more comfortable measuring out exactly, you're welcome to. But you'll see now why sometimes it's easier not to. And don't forget to label it. X is equal to negative 1. Whoops, let's bring that up so that you can see all of it. So there's my x-asymptote, not my x-asymptote, my vertical asymptote coming down to x is equal to negative 1 being my label. Now that I have that, I can plot my points. So my y-intercept is 0, 5, so 3, 4, 5 is up here, and that's going to be my point there. And remember, when you draw it, you need to, so sometimes you might want to extend that a little just to help you. You start close, not touching your asymptote. You go through your point and back close to your asymptote, not touching it. And then, of course, you need to put arrows on it to show that it carries on, getting closer and closer to that asymptote. Now let's come to our x-intercept. We've got negative 1 and 2/3. So negative 2 is about there. And then I'm going to estimate. So I'm going to roughly cut that up into 3 parts. And so here you can see that line there is going to give me negative 1 and 2/3. And so that is my x-intercept. And the same as before, we're going to start close. Whoops, don't curve away first. So that's very bad drawing there. And now I'm going to have to try and draw this around the typics there. But that's fine because it'll force me to stay close to my asymptote, curve away through my point, and then back close to my asymptote. And I can put arrows on. And there is a sketch of our graph. Example B, sketch the graphs indicating all asymptotes and intercepts. We're going to do 2 more examples on sketching just so that you can see the variety of graphs that you could get. So B1, my first step is I'm going to look for my asymptotes, and that will be for my y asymptote. I look at my q value, which is +3, and for my that's my horizontal asymptote. My vertical asymptote, I'm going to look at P, and remember to change the sign. So that's going to go +1. And I'm going to draw a quick sketch so that I can see what points I need to calculate. So there's my axes. Y is equal to 3 is going to be over here somewhere above my x-axis, and +1 is over here somewhere, moving my asymptote to the right. And so once again I look at my a value, it's a positive, so I'm still in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. So here we can see, whoops, that's a terrible drawing because it needs to come over here somewhere. So we can see that it's going to have an x, and that's even worse. Let's start again. So be careful of that because we don't know if that curve is going to go through the origin or not. And so over here we have our asymptotes quickly. So make sure your drawing starts by your asymptote, goes to your other asymptote like that, not your axes. So we can see we've got an y-intercept and an x-intercept in this piece. And this graph doesn't have a point, so we need a other point. We'll come back to what we need to look for that other point. So I'll always start with my y-intercept because that one is easier. In case this point goes through my origin, then I've done the easy one, and if it goes through the origin, then my x and my y-intercept are the same value. So we've got y is equal to 2 over, instead of x I've got 0, -1 plus 3. And so that will be -2 plus 3, which gives me 1. And so my point is 0, 1. Now let's go to our x-intercept. This one takes a little more work. Unfortunately, because this is not in the origin, we've got to work out our x-intercept. So 0 is equal to 2 over x minus 1 plus 3. So we're going to multiply everything by our LCD. So 0 times by x minus 1 is 0, 2 plus, and I'm just going to include this here so you can visualize it, times by x minus 1. So 3 times x is 3x, 3 times -1 is -3, and now we solve for x. So -3x is equal to -1, and so x is equal to +1/3. And so we have the point 1/3, 0. Finally, we need to work another point for that piece of our graph. And all we're going to do is substitute in a value for x, like we did for the y-intercept. But instead of 0, we've got to choose a different value. So I'm just going to write this part in for now. That's where we're going to substitute in our x value. Now, deciding which x value is very important. So notice in our sketch here, this point needs to be to the right of my vertical asymptote. So that is 1, so I need to choose a value bigger than 1. So we could choose 2, and I can always test it if I want nice round numbers. 2 minus 1 is 1, and 1 is a factor of 2, so it'll give me a nice number. So here I'm going to go with x is equal to 2. If this graph was on the left of my asymptote, then I'd have to choose a number smaller than 1. So keep that in mind when you're choosing that value. So 2 minus 1 is 1, 2 divided by 1 is 2, 2 plus 3 is 5. And so here we've got the point 2, 5. And now we have all the information we need to sketch our graph. So I'm going to squish it in over here. I'm going to just put this here so that we can see my whole graph, right? So I start off with my axes as usual. There's my y, there's my x. Next I go to my asymptotes, so y is equal to 3. 1, 2, 3, and already see I'm going to come into trouble there. So let's go up in 2s. 2, so 3 will be over here. And so I'm going to draw my asymptote over there. And don't forget to label it. So y is equal to 3. Now I go for my vertical asymptote, which is at +1, and I'm going to have to do thirds later, so I'm going to make it biggish. And there is my vertical asymptote. And don't forget to label it. X is equal to 1. Now let's start with our y-intercept. Our y-intercept is at 1. So that was 3, that's 2. That's going to be 1 over there. So that's my y-intercept. But we've also got an x-intercept at 1/3. So here we need to split this up into 3s. And you should be sketching in pencil so that you can erase this. I'm sketching in pen just because it shows up better. So that's about 1/3 over there, and so that is my x-intercept. So when I draw this curve, I'm going to make sure once again I stay close to my asymptote, go through both my intercepts nicely, don't miss it, and then go close to my asymptote again. Make sure that you don't touch your asymptote with your graphs. Your arrows can touch the asymptotes, but not your actual graph. Now we need to do our other points. So here I have 1, about the same size. Over there is 2, and then 3, 4. In the middle there we will have 5, and so this point will go over here. And so once again we will draw our graphs, staying close to our asymptote, going through our point, and then going back close to our other asymptote. And then lastly, just label that point. So x value is 2, y value is 5. And that is a sketch of this graph. Here is our final example. They ask us to sketch the graph I over here. So let's move that up so that we can work with it. So now it's your turn. Step number 1, we need to find what? Yes, the asymptotes. So over here, we've got, let's start with our horizontal asymptote. What is our horizontal asymptote? Yes, y is equal to 3. We're looking at our p-value. What is our second asymptote? Yes, x is equal to +1. We change the sign. And now we do our little sketch over here. Let's hope I can do this one better. But remember, it's not the end of the world to cross something out, and try again. There we go. And then this one is over here at 1. It looks very similar to the previous sketch we did, but now's the important part where you need to go look at your a value. And over here, different to the previous question, is we have a negative a value. And so instead of being in quadrants 1 and 3, we're now sitting in quadrants 2 and 4. And notice here we've got an x-intercept here and a y-intercept here, so we don't need to find an other point. So let's start with our y-intercept. For our y-intercept, who is 0? Yes, x is 0, so y is equal to -2 over 0 minus 1 plus 3. Put that into your calculator. -2 divided by -1 is +2. 2 plus 3 is 5. And so we've got the point 0, 5. Let's go for our x-intercept next. Who is 0 for our x-intercept? Yes, y is 0. So we're going to have to solve for x. So -2 all over x minus 1 plus 3. What is our next step? Yes, we're going to multiply each term by x minus 1. And that leaves us with 0 is equal to x minus 1 will cancel with itself, leaving us with -2. And I need to distribute 3. So 3x minus 3. And the last part you are pretty good at, solving for x. -2, -3 gives me -5. Divide both sides by -3, which gives me 5 over 3. And so my point will be at 1 2/3. And my y value is 0. And now we have all the information we need to draw our graph. So I'm going to start with a big set of axes again, unlike last time where I had to squish everything in. You can see why squishing things in can be problematic. And so there's my y-axis, x-axis, asymptote. First asymptote is at 3, so 1, 2, 3, and my vertical asymptote is at 1. So horizontal asymptote at 3, I should use the proper language. And let's draw that in. And don't forget to label it. Y is equal to 3. And now my vertical asymptote, try and make sure it lines up nicely with your y-axis, just because it looks better that way and less confusing. And don't forget to label it. And let's bring it up so you can see the whole thing. X is equal to 1. Now we plot our y-intercept, which was 0, 5. So 3, 4, 5 over there. And my point is going through there. And this actually quite nicely shows you, confirms that this piece is in this quadrant. I'm going to extend that a bit, simply because I like having space to start close to my asymptote, through my point, and then back close to my asymptote, and put on arrows. Now for our x-intercept, 1 2/3, so 1, so I need a 2, and then I break up the space into 3 parts, so about there is 1 2/3. So there's my point. And once again, I've got lots of space here to start close to my asymptote, go through my point, and then go close back to my asymptote over there. and that is our final example.